Number 1. Isolation is not an accident. It's a strategy your mind chooses long before you understand its purpose. Machiavelli believed that when a man steps away from the noise of the crowd, he begins to see the world as it truly is, ruthless, competitive, and brutally honest. Isolation is the first step toward becoming untouchable because it strips away the illusions that comfort weak men. Listen carefully. When you withdraw, you start to observe what others are too distracted to notice, the hidden motives behind every smile, the quiet envy behind every compliment, the subtle power games in every conversation. Most people avoid this clarity because it demands responsibility. But not you. You're here because something inside you refuses to stay blind. Isolation is not loneliness, it is a forge. When you cut yourself off from meaningless noise, you begin to hear the truth of your own mind. You begin to see your strengths without distortion and your weaknesses without excuses. Machiavelli would tell you this: a man who cannot stand alone will never stand above. Power requires distance, strength requires silence, and clarity requires isolation. The moment you stop explaining yourself to the world loses its grip on you. This is where real transformation begins. You no longer react, you analyze. You no longer chase, you evaluate. You no longer seek approval, you observe how desperately others need it. In isolation, the mask falls, yours and theirs. You begin to understand the true psychology of withdrawal. You're not escaping people. You're escaping the version of yourself they trapped you in. This distance lets you evolve without permission, grow without applause, and rise without being seen, until the moment you choose to step back into the world with quiet, undeniable dominance. Stay with me. The next section will take you deeper into this transformation. And before we continue, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 2. When a man pulls away from the world, people assume he is breaking, but Machiavelli would smirk at their simplicity. A strategic withdrawal is not a collapse, it is a sharpening. Isolation gives you the one advantage no rival can corrupt, a mind unclouded by noise. Look around. Most men drown themselves in meaningless interaction, desperate to feel relevant, terrified of their own thoughts. But when you choose distance, you reclaim sovereignty over your inner world. This is where dark psychology begins to work in your favor. You stop responding emotionally, and you start responding strategically. You see patterns in people's behavior: who manipulates through guilt, who influences through charm, who dominates through silence. Isolation trains your perception like a blade. It cuts through deception instantly. You become the man who sees behind the curtain, and that makes you dangerous. When you remove yourself from the crowd, you stop playing their game. You create your own rules. You control your time, your attention, your energy. 3 currencies weaker men waste freely. Machiavelli understood this well. A leader who cannot distance himself becomes a slave to the opinions of the masses, but a man who stands apart commands from the shadows. In solitude, you begin the cold reconstruction of the self. Your emotions stabilize. Your mind hardens, your focus sharpens. You begin to think like a strategist, not a spectator. This is why isolation feels heavy. It's the weight of your old identity dying. The chatter quiets, the impulses weaken, and your mind begins to operate with precision. Isolation is not punishment, it is recalibration. And the moment you learn to master it, you stop being controlled by the world and start controlling your response to it. Stay with me. We go darker in the next section. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 3. There comes a point in isolation when the world stops feeling distant and starts feeling small, predictable, almost laughably transparent. This is where Machiavelli's insight turns brutal. Once you detach emotionally, you begin to see how unprepared most people are for a man who thinks independently. Their identities depend on validation. Their choices depend on fear. Their confidence depends on approval. But yours no longer does. Isolation breaks the chains that kept your mind tied to the expectations of others. You stop fearing judgment because there is no audience left to perform for. You stop explaining yourself because explanation is the language of the insecure. Instead, you move with cold intention. Every action becomes deliberate, calculated, controlled. This is masculine stoicism in its purest form, not the absence of emotion, but the domination of emotion. Isolation teaches you to operate without applause, to grow without permission, to endure without complaint. And when you stop needing the world begins to sense your independence. People notice the shift but can't decode it. They feel your silence as pressure, your distance as power, your lack of need as superiority. This is the psychology of withdrawal. When you remove yourself, you stop being predictable. And when you stop being predictable, you become powerful. Machiavelli would tell you that mystery multiplies authority. A man who is always available is never valued. A man who is always talking is never taken seriously. A man who is always socialized is never truly feared. But a man who stands apart commands an aura that others feel before they understand. Isolation is not about avoiding people. It's about becoming the kind of person people can't read, can't manipulate, and can't control. Stay with me. The next section goes even deeper. And before we continue, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 4. The deeper you sink into isolation, the clearer your vision becomes, not just of others, but of yourself. And this is where most men break. They can handle being away from people, but they cannot handle being confronted by their own reflection. Machiavelli understood that a man who cannot rule himself will always be ruled by others. Isolation exposes your impulses, your fears, your weaknesses with ruthless honesty. There is no distraction left to hide behind, no noise to drown the truth, no audience to convince, only you. And this is exactly why isolation is a weapon. When you face your own flaws without flinching, you do what 99% of people are too weak to attempt. The world teaches you to avoid discomfort. Isolation teaches you to dissect it. You begin to observe your behavioral patterns, why you react the way you do, why certain people trigger you, why certain failures haunt you. And once you understand these patterns, you gain the power to rewrite them. This is dark psychology turned inward, used not to break others, but to rebuild yourself. You become your own strategist, your own critic, your own architect. Slowly, you remove the pointless emotions, the childish expectations, the fragile dependencies. In their place rises something colder, stronger, more precise. You start acting based on logic, not impulse, strategy, not insecurity, purpose, not approval. And when you do step back into the world, people sense the shift instantly. Your eyes carry the weight of someone who has confronted himself. Your presence feels grounded, unshakable. You move differently, not rushed, not reactive, not seeking anything. This is the transformation isolation was preparing you for. Self-command. And Machiavelli believed that a man who commands himself becomes impossible to command by anyone else. Stay with me. Section 5 will go deeper into power. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 5. Power begins the moment you stop needing anyone to validate your existence. Isolation teaches you this with a cold, unforgiving clarity. Machiavelli warned that dependence is the root of vulnerability. Whoever you rely on controls you. But when you withdraw, you strip others of that power. You operate from a place of internal stability, not social approval. This is where your dominance starts to sharpen. You become the man who does not ask, does not beg, does not seek. You simply act, and the world adjusts around you. In isolation, you learn the discipline of withholding your energy. You stop wasting it on arguments that don't matter, people who drain you, situations that offer nothing in return. You learn to conserve, to store, to contain. This containment builds an aura around you. People feel your presence even before you speak. Dark psychology calls this controlled scarcity. When you become less accessible, your value multiplies. Your absence creates weight. Your silence creates tension. Your distance creates curiosity. And when you finally choose to speak, your words land with force because you are not one of the noisy, desperate voices scattered through society. You speak with purpose, precision, calculation. This is masculine stoicism at its peak. You do not react, you assess. You do not chase, you position. You do not prove, you demonstrate through action. Isolation turns you into a hunter of details, a man who notices what others ignore, who predicts behavior by observing patterns, who stays 10 steps ahead because he is no longer tangled in emotional chaos. And Machiavelli understood this truth deeply. The man who sees clearly gains the advantage over the man who merely feels. Isolation gives you that clarity. It pulls you out of the trenches and places you above the battlefield. Stay with me. Section 6 takes you into the psychology of influence. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 6. Once isolation sharpens your perception, you begin to understand the true architecture of influence. Most people try to control others through noise, talking louder, demanding attention, forcing presence. Machiavelli knew this was amateur behavior. Real influence comes from silence, observation, and strategic timing. The man who watches more than he speaks always holds the advantage. Isolation turns you into that man. You start to read the micro-expressions people accidentally expose, the insecurity hidden in their tone, the hunger behind their compliments. You understand their desires before they admit them, their fears before they show them. This is where dark psychology becomes a tool, not a game. You learn to guide conversations without dominating them, to plant ideas without claiming ownership, to shift outcomes without raising suspicion. Influence becomes subtle, invisible, precise. You don't manipulate through force. You manipulate through insight. And the beauty of this skill is that people never recognize its source. They only feel your gravity. They trust you without knowing why. They follow your lead because your conviction is stronger than their confusion. This is the power of a mind trained in solitude. You operate like a strategist, not a participant. You see the battlefield from above, not from within. Isolation makes you emotionally untangled, mentally sharp, and strategically patient, all traits that make your presence unpredictable and therefore powerful. Machiavelli believed that uncertainty is a weapon. When people cannot read you, they cannot control you. And when they cannot control you, they begin to respect you. Some reluctantly, others instinctively. Influence stops being something you chase. It becomes something you emanate. Stay with me. Section 7 goes deeper into emotional detachment as power. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 7. Emotional detachment is not coldness, it is control, and isolation is the training ground where that control is forged. Machiavelli understood that a man ruled by emotion is a man ruled by others, because anyone who can trigger you can steer you. But when you spend time alone, when you sit in silence long enough to understand your own emotional mechanisms, something powerful happens. The world loses the ability to shake you. You stop reacting to insults because you see the insecurity behind them. You stop chasing love because you recognize how cheaply people offer it. You stop fearing loss because you've already learned to stand alone. Your emotional landscape becomes stable, grounded, unshakable. This is masculine stoicism in its purest form, not suppressing emotion, but mastering it. Isolation teaches you the discipline of pausing before you respond, analyzing before you decide, and observing before you engage. You begin to separate your feelings from your actions, your impulses from your intentions. And that separation is where dominance is born. When others get angry, you get quiet. When they panic, you stay calm. When they rush, you calculate. People may interpret your detachment as arrogance, coldness, or indifference, but deep inside they feel intimidated by the fact that they cannot move you. Emotional control creates a psychological imbalance that always works in your favor. You become the man whose silence feels heavier than another man's rage. The man whose presence feels like a wall no one can push through. Machiavelli would tell you that such a man is almost impossible to conquer because he is not bound by the strings others pull. Isolation taught you this: your emotions belong to you, not to the world. And when you reclaim that power, you stop being manipulated and start becoming formidable. Stay with me. Section 8 dives into the power of unpredictability. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 8. Unpredictability is one of the greatest weapons a man can possess, and isolation is what gives birth to it. When you detach from the world, you stop moving according to its rhythm. You stop responding the way people expect. You stop behaving in patterns they can predict. Machiavelli believed that a man who cannot be anticipated becomes impossible to control. And that is exactly what isolation shapes you into. You're no longer the person who replies instantly, who explains endlessly, who reacts emotionally. You become a quiet variable in a world full of predictable formulas. People don't know what you're thinking, what you're planning, or what you want, and this uncertainty makes them cautious. It forces them to respect boundaries they never respected before. Unpredictability bends the social dynamic in your favor because it destabilizes every attempt to read or manipulate you. Your silence becomes a question mark. Your distance becomes a statement. Your calmness becomes a threat. In isolation, you learn to act from intention rather than impulse. You choose when to appear and when to disappear. You choose when to speak and when to hold back. You choose when to advance and when to retreat. This strategic inconsistency keeps others off balance while keeping you firmly in control. Dark psychology calls this behavioral contrast, the ability to shift gears without warning, creating psychological tension that others feel but cannot explain. And this tension increases your power. You become the man whose next move can't be guessed, whose boundaries can't be crossed, whose mindset can't be decoded. Machiavelli would say, fear is born from uncertainty, and respect is born from fear. Your unpredictability creates both, and it all began the moment you embraced isolation. Stay with me. Section 9 takes you into the evolution of power identity. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 9. As isolation reshapes your mind, something deeper forms beneath the surface, a power identity. This isn't an attitude, a style, or a mood. It's a complete reconstruction of who you are at your core. Machiavelli understood that power is not something you chase. It is something you become, and isolation forces that becoming. When you strip away the expectations of society, the emotional noise of relationships, the constant influence of other people's opinions, you begin to see the type of man you were always meant to be. A man driven by purpose instead of approval. A man guided by logic instead of impulse. A man defined by discipline rather than desire. You start eliminating habits that weaken you and building habits that fortify you. Your mindset shifts from, I hope things change, to, I will change them myself. You stop waiting for opportunities and begin crafting strategies. You stop seeking permission and start asserting direction. Your sense of self becomes sharper, clearer, heavier. You carry yourself differently, even in silence. Your presence alone communicates authority because it is rooted in internal certainty, not external validation. This is the identity of a man who has confronted his own shadows and survived them. A man who has broken, rebuilt, and risen without applause. A man who no longer fears losing anything because he has learned to stand without anyone. Machiavelli would call this the foundation of sovereignty, the point at which you no longer belong to the world, but the world adjusts around you. People can sense this identity before you speak. They feel your groundedness, your calm aggression, your controlled ambition. You don't dominate through force, but through undeniable presence. This is what isolation was molding in you all along, the identity of someone who cannot be shaken, manipulated, or diminished. Stay with me. Section 10 completes the transformation. And remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Number 10.
This is the final stage, the point where isolation stops being a phase and becomes a foundation. The moment when you no longer see distance as escape, but as elevation. Machiavelli believed that a powerful man must always keep one part of himself untouched by the world, a core that no betrayal, no failure, no enemy can reach. Isolation builds that core. It strips away your old identity, the one shaped by others, weakened by expectations, softened by constant validation, and replaces it with something forged in silence and pressure. You become a man who thinks before speaking, observes before acting, and chooses before reacting. A man who knows his value without needing applause. A man who can walk away from anything that threatens his peace because he has learned to stand on his own ground. The psychology of withdrawal has turned into the psychology of command. You don't need to announce your strength, it radiates. You don't need to justify your choices. They stand on their own. You don't need the world's acceptance. The world adjusts to your presence. People sense this transformation. Some will respect it. Some will fear it. Some will try to pull you back into the version of yourself that was easier for them to control. But you will not return. You've stepped into a higher state of awareness, a colder, clearer, more disciplined version of yourself. And once you've tasted that level of self-mastery, you cannot go back to being ordinary. Machiavelli would say that true power belongs to the man who governs himself. That is now you. You have crossed the threshold. From this point on, you move with purpose, with silence, with precision. The world will not understand you, and that is exactly why it will not be able to stop you. If this monologue spoke to you, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next.